Where to start? Let's start with something we were talking about before, because it's on my mind watching the end again. When he goes through that room and he sees all the things she created for him, or just created in general, I got in mind that this is a movie about death, but it's also about creation. It's about making things, it's about making films, it's about making art. And it left me leaving the theater wanting to create something of my own. So talk a little bit about how it's about death, but also about creating things that last beyond death.
Well, the whole reason to make the movie was kind of put myself back together. So it was about creation. But I didn't. When you mentioned it earlier, that I really hear the phrase that way. Quite maybe touching is kind of exactly the right words, because it is about that. It wasn't about death. It's about life and about leaving something behind. Both what she left behind for him, and she's choosing this moment, and you realize that she's been an artist all along as well, and that's why one of the many reasons why she got him as well as she did. And it's also about me leaving a film behind that represented who I was at that time, and that also would be a tribute to someone I loved as well. And so it is very much about creation. I don't think I had those exact words in my head going into it, but it is very much about putting yourself together and making something.
The dedication to your father, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. And it's something that I actually owe a lot to Jeremy, because it wasn't something I led with or talked about openly, really. You don't really need to get the job or anything like that. It was about, because I loved the movie and I knew I could make something personal. And I really identified with Greg and his journey. But above all, it was a comedy. But yeah, it was time to me to face this and deal with it, and by making something. And Jeremy at the very end, I think I tried to bury the name in the end credits. Jeremy was the first to say you should make it the first credit. And then the first time we screened it with that credit was at Sundance, and then that forced me to talk about it because people asked me about it, and that was all part of the journey to kind of now talk about it. So I owe Jeremy quite a lot for that.
Can you talk a little bit, both of you, about because you had a crazy Sundance experience. I mean, we had a crazy one just watching what you guys were going through in that
unexpected,
all that one day, because I woke up that morning, I'd heard of the film, and I wasn't really sure if I had time to see it, and then by the end of that day, it was the only film you should see that day. And then on top of that, you got into this whole bidding war that was like legendary. What do you remember about that experience?
Bragging can't be more talking to agents. I think I talked to 3,000 agents.
Nothing soothes the creative mind like talking to agents.
It was one of the most beautiful nights of my life. Everything changed that day. I think we talked earlier that we're also exhausted trying to get the movie ready, having screened it for just a couple of, two very small friends and family, and then screen it for so many people, and then have to be received that way. I think Jeremy touched my shoulder during the screen and was sitting behind me because it was catching, and then you kind of let yourself go.
Yeah, I remember the first, we had never showed it to a real audience. We did one screening with maybe 75 people in the Tribeca screening where we sort of said, I ran into a friend who had was a high school teacher, and she could bring some people and even some kids, and we sort of cobbled together an audience, and that was the only audience we'd seen. In fact, that day we watched it and we were like, well, we're going to make some surveys to see if there's any notes. We sat in the back, we're like, well, we didn't hear a single laugh, and so the whole time it was a disaster. And then we got the little comments, everyone said really nice things, and it was, well, maybe it's because they know us, but we sort of just thought, well, we felt secure with what we had, and then Sundance was literally the first time. So 15 seconds in, we're laughing, there was energy, and I was like, okay, I felt that energy before.
But so neither of you knew it would blow up that big. I've always wondered when people win big awards like this, how confident they walked into Sundance. Did they know they had it in them?
I was sick. I didn't have a voice. I had a fever 2 days before. I was in bed. So I barely got up on stage to introduce it. So it was a complete surprise.
This is the kind of movie that doesn't work with the right me, Earl, or Dying Earl. So talk a little bit about how you found those three parts.
It was about almost a year of auditioning because the movie came together, but it fell apart, then came together again. But Thomas was always a front runner, but Olivia was clearly the Rachel. She had everything. She was funny without trying to be. She was able to sell all the big dramatic scenes without being melodramatic. She had a wonderful quality about it. It was quite accessible, And it was then about finding the right match so that the chemistry wasn't sexual, because it wasn't that movie, or I didn't want people to expect a kiss or that big scene. Even though he tells you, no, it's not this kind of movie, if you have the wrong couple, you'll still expect it, or want it, or feel disappointed. So, and they had a wonderful connection, and they, over the period of all the auditions and callbacks, they became friends, and you sense that they were very comfortable with each other. And then R.J. Tyler was his first movie. One of the last people I saw, and he submitted to tape, he just moved to LA from Burbank, from Florida, and he had this incredible confidence. And together they made a beautiful, they complemented each other, and they made a perfect trio.
We did not have an Earl, and we were like maybe 3 weeks out from shooting, and we had someone we wanted to use, but the schedule wasn't working out, and we were like just proceeding with our fingers crossed and auditioning like mad. And Dave showed up, and then you flew back and we met him. And Thomas right away said, right after the audition.
He sent me an email saying, and I saw that I was Skyping with them and saw their audition, and he sent me an email.
Yeah, well, their chemistry is essential too.
Yeah, I want to ask you about one of the things that made me laugh is watching Greg as a filmmaker, that when there are no stakes, he's fine. He can work fast. He doesn't have any issues being creative. But this one time when there are stakes here, and there's something really important, and there's emotions, and it's so critical, and he gets stuck when it means something to him. Was that a little bit of you creeping in as well, or was that?
I don't know. I mean, in hindsight, and as you talk about it, because you're working just emotionally, so, but then when you have to talk about it, then you start putting thoughts together, and it all makes sense, but you don't know how much of that was. Did you know going into it? But yeah, I feel in a lot of ways I started to find my voice just of the kind of film as a filmmaker, and I think in some ways he's doing the same thing, learning to make something for somebody else, not just for him and Earl. That's a big step. And then learning to find his voice and not relying on the parodies and sock puppets, and then how do you, and he's alone now, without Earl's out. So he finishes this film alone, and how does he do that? How do you pay tribute to someone who gets you, someone who is a true friend, someone who is living a very compressed life, who's going to be gone, maybe be gone quickly, and even though you're in denial, that's, that may happen, and how do you say that? And so it becomes colors and shapes, and it's a little more abstract. It's only way to deal with that abstract idea.
It's also the first time he's got an audience, like the other stuff he's made for himself.
Yes. And he makes it into a movie.
Yeah, right. Can you speak a little bit about the filmic influences here? I know you worked a lot with Ryan Murphy. I mean, that impacted anything. And when I saw the film, I thought of Wes Anderson, not even knowing your involvement, because there's a very tight attention to detail, like Wes has in his films, especially in the films within films. So can you speak about filmmakers or films that inspire you?
Well, the films that I looked at, Ryan Murphy gave me an incredible opportunity to direct. My first directed by credit was Glee, first season. And that means a lot. All of a sudden, you call yourself a director. When you're a second year director, which I was also, he was like, well, I did these things like that, and no one really knows what you do, and you have to explain it. So now you own it. So you gave me that and an opportunity to experiment. Like, certainly in American Horror Story, you just do whatever you want. And you push the style. That was the learning curve. For this one, I learned, I looked at, because I was looking at when I was putting my presentation reel together, I was thinking of Bud Cort as Harold and Maude, and Hoffman as Ben Braddock and Mike Nichols. The graduates, they were very interesting and very similar in a lot of ways. And then the way the adults are portrayed in those movies was also kind of similar in the way the adults are portrayed. And that's nice, and also how economical those films were. We had 23 days to make a movie. So I knew I was in, and I didn't want to do a lot of copy, but I knew I had to. So I saw like Hal Ashman, Mike Nichols, and even though I just learned that Mike Nichols had 100 days to make graduate. So you look at the movie, it's quite simple. And so those are the films that I was looking at more than anything, and really simple, more abstract things like the short films of Charles Williams, and that was kind of the what I was feeling, So that was really what was driving it.
You mentioned the portrayal of the parents, and I was really impressed that all the parents in this are supportive parents. And a lot of times in movies about teenagers, you know, there's the asshole stepfather, there's somebody that's working against these kids, but here they're all supportive, and I'm guessing again, that maybe that's something you're familiar with, or that's something you at least could identify with.
Yeah, I think maybe the one that isn't, there is some, I think, some disconnect between Denise and Rachel, Molly Shannon. You see the world down there, which is cold and stark and nothing. You know, it's all pure one, and no pottery barn, and no family photographs, and everything's white. And
I'm not saying they're not weird.
no. You can sense that she has a world that's very separate from her mom's. And I think when you see them, and I think we talked about that. I think she's relied on a sense of humor, and she has an alcohol issue, and I think, and you see her daughter's room upstairs filled with colors and patterns and photos and memories, and you know, and I think there is something that isn't talked about that is very clear that's present there. Maybe that isn't that supportive, that maybe they don't get each other. And then when you see them at the end of the bed, I think that was like a good closure to that relationship. And I think his parents were quite supportive. Yes, it didn't weird.
We're going to have people line up here if you want to start lining up for any questions from the audience, just so you know. 23 days sounds like a challenge, so maybe that's part of it, but for both of you, what was the most challenging aspect of this production? The first thing that comes to mind when I say that word could be a single day, could be something overall, the challenge of this production.
I think it was just trying to not have it fall into any of the trappings of what people think an American high school movie would be, and obviously we're influenced by John Hughes movies and other movies, but we just wanted this to be different in every way and sort of not be, you know, a parody or a kind of cliche or a romanticized version of high school, and actually just try and capture that, what all the best coming of age movies do, which is just capture that feeling of what it's like to be at a certain place in your life before you get to the next place. And that was like, I think, what it was all